In the vastness of space, the Xeric Dominion had long ruled with an iron fist. Their empire stretched across countless systems, their power undisputed. Yet the Terran Alliance, a coalition of human colonies, had proven to be an unexpected force. After years of brutal conflict, the war between the Xeric and humanity had finally ended in an uneasy truce. The peace came at a price the Xeric were unwilling to pay, but one they had no choice but to honor. The Xeric High Council had decided on a harsh form of retribution. The peace treaty required that a representative of the Xeric, someone of noble birth, be handed over to the Terrans. She would be placed under their care, a symbol of surrender, a way for the humans to feel they had won. It was not slavery, the Xeric argued. It was an exchange, a gesture of respect for the peace they had reluctantly agreed to. Ambassador Kalari was her name. She was the daughter of a noble Xeric house, raised in the opulent halls of her ancestors, trained for diplomacy, war, and leadership. To be handed over like this was nothing short of a humiliation. Kalari had always been taught that humans were beneath the Xeric, their savage ways and unpredictable nature something to be controlled, not treated as equals. The Xeric Council chose Captain Elias Wren to oversee the transfer. Elias was a man of reputation, a hero of the Terran Alliance who had led his forces in the final battles of the war. He was no stranger to war or its harsh realities, but he was known for his ability to navigate delicate situations with a calm and collected manner. The exchange was set to take place aboard the human diplomatic ship, Unity's Edge. It was an enormous vessel, sleek and modern, a symbol of the new era of human diplomacy. Kalari stood at the center of the ship's main hall, her silver cloak flowing around her like a shadow of her noble past. Her sharp eyes scanned the humans who milled about, their chatter loud and full of life, nothing like the controlled stillness of the Xeric court. When Captain Elias Wren entered, the room fell into a quiet hush. He was tall, his posture straight, his face a mask of calm professionalism. His uniform was pristine, adorned with medals from battles fought and won. He walked toward Kalari with a deliberate pace, his every step echoing through the hall. The Tune, Xeric ambassador, did not bow or show deference. Her pride refused to allow it. Instead, she stood tall, meeting Elias's gaze with an intensity that felt almost like a challenge. She had never been one to bend to the will of others, especially not humans. Elias stopped just in front of her, studying her with a steady gaze. His expression softened slightly, as though recognizing the weight of the moment. He extended his hand, offering a simple gesture of greeting. Kalari's eyes narrowed as she looked at his outstretched hand. This was not how things were supposed to go. She was not meant to be treated as an equal. Humans were supposed to bow before the might of the Xeric. But there was something in Elias's eyes, a quiet understanding, perhaps even sympathy. He wasn't a conqueror. He wasn't looking at her as someone to subdue or dominate. There was no triumph in his stance. He was simply a man offering a greeting. She hesitated. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her, the eyes of the humans watching, waiting for her to act. It was almost as if her response would decide everything, how they would see her, how they would see the Xeric. After a long moment, Kalari slowly raised her hand. She touched Elias's fingers, her touch light, almost tentative. The contact was brief, but it sent a strange feeling through her, like a spark. For a heartbeat, she almost forgot that she was standing before a human, the enemy who had torn apart her world. All she could focus on was the warmth of his hand, the subtle firmness of his grip. Elias gave a small nod, his expression unchanged. "Welcome aboard, Ambassador Kalari," he said, his voice calm and steady. Kalari withdrew her hand quickly, unsure of what she had just felt. She had been taught to view humans as inferior, to see them as nothing more than pests in the grand scheme of the galaxy. And yet, there was something in the way Elias had looked at her, not as a trophy to be paraded, not as an enemy to be crushed, but as a person. It confused her. The moment passed, and the ceremony continued. Kelari was led to her quarters, her mind racing. She couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. She had expected hatred, disdain, and fear. Instead, she had received something different, a strange, unexpected respect. As the Unity's Edge left the Xeric-controlled sector, heading toward the neutral zone, Kelari stood on the observation deck, watching the stars drift by. She thought about what had happened during that brief exchange. It was just a touch, just a simple human gesture, and yet it lingered in her mind like an echo. Kelari clenched her fists, willing herself to ignore the strange warmth spreading through her chest. She had been given to a human as retribution. Nothing more, nothing less. Yet she couldn't shake the thought that something was beginning to change, not just in her, but in the way humans viewed the Xeric. Kelari had expected her time aboard, the Unity's Edge to be a silent, suffocating existence. She had prepared herself for the cold indifference of the humans, their whispers of what she was. A prisoner, a symbol of defeat. But what she hadn't prepared for was the slow shift in her own feelings, a feeling she couldn't quite explain. Her quarters were nothing like the grandeur of her home back on Xyrek, but they were comfortable enough. A small, circular window gave her a view of the endless stars. The walls were lined with data screens and consoles, and a small bed sat in the corner, neatly made. It was not the opulence she was used to, but she could manage. The crew of the Unity's Edge seemed to avoid her for the most part. The humans still looked at her with curiosity, but they were respectful, careful not to show too much interest. She had expected them to sneer at her, to remind her of the power her people once held over them. Yet most were content to merely observe her from a distance, and in some ways that bothered her. It wasn't until the second day, when she was summoned to the ship's central command room for a briefing, that she first saw Elias again. The room was large, with a massive holotable in the center displaying a map of nearby star systems. The humans were gathered around, their faces serious, their voices low. They spoke in the calm, efficient way that Kelari had come to recognize as typical of their species. Elias stood at the head of the table, his posture straight and confident. As she entered, all eyes turned to her. There was no judgment, no hostility. There was only a quiet, steady gaze, and she felt as if the weight of their stares had somehow lightened. "Ambassador," Elias greeted her, his voice warm but professional. "Please, have a seat." Kelari hesitated for only a moment before taking her place. She had no desire to speak, no interest in participating in their discussions. But she found herself listening closely, intrigued by the way they worked together, how they communicated with one another, how they made decisions as a unit. The humans spoke with passion and conviction. They didn't simply act out of duty, they seemed to care for one another, to believe in the importance of their mission. It was a strange thing for Kelari to witness, as her people had always valued power, control, and individual strength above all else. But the humans seemed different. They acted with purpose, but not with arrogance. As the meeting concluded, Elias motioned for her to stay behind. The crew filed out, leaving the two of them alone. Kelari folded her arms, her gaze fixed on the floor. "I hope you're finding your accommodations acceptable," Elias said, his tone lighter now. "I know it's not what you're used to." Kelari looked up, meeting his eyes. For the first time, she saw something in his gaze that was different. Curiosity, yes, but also a kind of understanding. "It's fine," she replied curtly. "I don't require much." Elias smiled, though it was brief. "Good. If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to ask." Kelari didn't respond. Instead, she turned her attention to the holotable, where the map of star systems still hovered. Something about the way the humans interacted with one another made her uneasy. She wasn't used to this kind of openness. this willingness to communicate without hiding behind layers of pride. As the days passed, she found herself wandering the halls of the ship more often, drawn to the people who worked so diligently. The humans were everywhere, their energy a stark contrast to the quiet, controlled nature of the Zirek. They laughed, they argued, they worked side by side with an ease that seemed foreign to her. One afternoon, she found herself on the observation deck once again. She gazed out at the stars, lost in thought. The light from distant suns bathed the ship in a soft glow, and for a moment, Kelari allowed herself to relax. The tension in her chest that had been building ever since her arrival began to ease, though she didn't fully understand why. She was startled when a voice behind her broke the silence. "You seem lost in thought, Ambassador." Kelari turned, to find Elias standing a few feet away, his hands tucked behind his back. He was smiling again, though it was gentle, like he understood something she didn't. "I was thinking," she replied, her voice soft, "about your people, how they function, how they work together." Elias raised an eyebrow. "And what do you think of it?" Kelari hesitated, then spoke honestly. "It's strange to me. You seem so connected, so human in a way. I don't understand it." Elias nodded slowly, as though considering her words carefully. "It's not perfect," he said, his tone thoughtful. "But it works. Humans have always been resilient. We might not have the strength of the Zyrek or the technology of some of the other races, but we have each other. And sometimes that's enough." Kelari found herself studying him more closely now. There was something in his eyes, something that made her wonder if perhaps she had misjudged humans. Could they truly be so different from her people? Could they be more than just the enemy she had always been taught to despise? Before she could say anything else, Elias turned to leave. But he paused at the door, looking back at her. "If you ever want to talk," he said, "I'm here. No pressure. But I think you'll find we're not all that different." Kelari watched him leave, the words hanging in the air like a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. As the door closed behind him, she couldn't help but wonder, could he be right? Could she truly find something in this strange, unpredictable species that was worth understanding? Days on the Unity's edge blended into one another. Kelari found herself caught between the familiar stiffness of her upbringing and the strange warmth of the humans around her. She was a stranger in a world that seemed both unfamiliar and, in some ways, inviting. The humans weren't perfect. She had witnessed their arguments, their impatience, their moments of failure, but she had also seen something else in them, a spark, a drive to push forward together, even when things were hard. Captain Elias Wren, in particular, intrigued her. He was always polite, always professional, yet there was something about him that made him different from the others. He wasn't just a soldier or a diplomat. He seemed to carry a weight, a quiet strength that made people follow him without question. Kelari couldn't help but notice how the crew trusted him, how they looked to him in times of need. She found herself wondering how someone like him could exist in a species she had always considered primitive. The more time she spent with the humans, the more she realized that they were not the monsters her people had made them out to be. They were imperfect, yes, but in their imperfection they had a unique kind of beauty. Their strength wasn't in their weapons or technology. It was in their ability to come together, to put their differences aside, and to face challenges as a team. One evening, Kelari stood in front of the large observation window in her quarters, watching the stars pass by. The deep blackness of space stretched out before her, and for the first time since she had boarded the ship, she felt a strange sense of peace. It was quiet here, isolated from the noise of the galaxy, and for a moment she allowed herself to forget the war, the betrayal, and the reasons why she was here. She was startled from her thoughts when the door to her quarters opened. Elias stepped inside, his presence familiar but still unexpected. He wasn't supposed to come here. He had his own duties, his own responsibilities. But there he was, standing in her doorway, looking at her with that calm, steady gaze. "Hope I'm not disturbing you," he said, his voice low. Kalari turned to face him, unsure of what to say. She hadn't expected this, hadn't expected him to seek her out. She was a prisoner, nothing more, nothing less. Yet, here he was, standing before her as if they were equals. "You're not disturbing me," she replied after a pause. "I was just thinking." Elias nodded, taking a step closer. "I've been meaning to ask you something," he said, his voice gentle. "I know you've been through a lot, and I know this whole situation must feel strange to you, but I wanted to know how you're really doing." Kalari frowned, confused by the question. How was she supposed to answer? How was she supposed to explain the confusion swirling inside her? She didn't know what she felt anymore. She didn't know if she could trust these humans, if she could trust Elias. And yet, there was something in his eyes, something that made her want to tell him everything. "I'm fine," she said quickly, hoping to end the conversation. "I'm just adjusting." Elias seemed to sense her hesitation. "I understand," he said, his voice soft. "But if you ever need to talk, you know where to find me." Kalari met his gaze, feeling something stir within her. Something she couldn't quite name. It was as if she was standing at the edge of a precipice, unsure whether to step forward or turn back. There was no denying the pull she felt toward Elias, toward the humanity that seemed to flow through him. She wanted to say something, to ask him why he treated her differently from the others. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she found herself looking away, her eyes returning to the stars. Elias didn't press her. He simply gave her a small nod before turning to leave. As he reached the door, he paused, glancing over his shoulder. "Take care of yourself, Ambassador," he said quietly, and then he was gone. Kalari stood there, her thoughts a whirlwind of confusion. She had never expected to feel this way. She had come here with the firm belief that humans were weak, that they would crumble under the weight of their own emotions. And yet, every day she found herself drawn closer to them, not just as a species, but as individuals. It wasn't just Elias. She had started to notice other things as well. The crew's bond with one another, the way they joked and laughed. Together, the way they shared their hopes and fears. It was so different from the rigid structure of the Zyrek. The Zyrek valued strength, control, and order. But the humans valued connection. Kalari couldn't help but wonder if there was something in that. Could it be that the strength of the Zyrek wasn't the only way to survive? Could there be another path, one that didn't rely on dominance, but on unity and trust? The thought lingered in her mind, and the more she thought about it, the more she realized how little she understood about these humans, and how much she still had to learn. Days passed, and Kalari found herself in deeper conversations with Elias, with other members of the crew. They spoke of their homes, their families, their dreams. It was all so new to her. She had been taught to view humanity as a race of savages, their emotions wild and uncontrollable. But the more she listened, the more she realized that there was depth to them. Perhaps it wasn't about strength after all. Perhaps it was about understanding, about finding common ground, even when everything seemed to be stacked against you. It was a lesson that was slowly sinking into Kalari's heart, one that she wasn't sure she was ready to accept, but one that she couldn't ignore. And then, one day, as they sat together in the ship's dining hall, Elias reached across the table and lightly touched her hand. It was a small gesture, but it sent a jolt of warmth through her, like a spark that ignited something deep within. For the first time, Kalari didn't pull away. Kalari had begun to feel a strange shift within herself. She no longer viewed her time aboard the Unity's edge as a form of punishment, but as a peculiar opportunity. Each day, she learned something new about the humans around her, something she hadn't expected. Their resilience, their way of caring for each other, and the bond they shared as a species, it was beginning to affect her in ways she couldn't explain. Yet, despite the quiet moments of connection, the tension between the Zyrek and humans was always there, lingering in the background. The war was over, but the scars it left behind weren't easily erased. Every time Kalari looked into the eyes of one of the crew members, she saw something more than curiosity. There was a wariness, a reminder that she was not just an individual, to them, but a symbol of the enemy they had fought and suffered against. It wasn't just the crew who watched her with suspicion. News of her time aboard the Unity's Edge had spread across both the human and Zyrek sectors. The Terran government had been cautious about how they treated her, afraid that any sign of warmth toward her might appear as weakness or betrayal. The Zyrek, on the other hand, had begun to openly criticize her for being too comfortable with the humans, accusing her of dishonoring her people. One afternoon, as Kalari sat in the ship's lounge, Elias approached her. He looked different today, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a hint of concern. He stood at a distance, almost as if unsure whether to speak to her. "Ambassador," Elias began, his voice steady, "I need to ask you something." Kalari looked up at him, her brow furrowed. "What is it?" "There's talk among the higher-ups," Elias continued, his eyes avoiding hers for a moment. "Some of the others are questioning. Well, they're questioning whether it's safe to continue allowing you this level of freedom." Kalari's heart skipped a beat. She had suspected this might happen. Despite the growing bond she had felt with the crew, despite the moments where she had almost begun to think of them as something more than the enemy, she knew her position was tenuous. The humans didn't fully trust her, and her own people would see her as a traitor if she didn't act in accordance with their wishes. "I see," she said quietly, her mind racing. "They want you back on Zyrek," Elias added. "There are some who believe you're becoming too attached to us." The words stung more than Kalari had expected. It wasn't just the fact that they didn't trust her, it was the way they saw her. To them, she was nothing more than an object of political exchange, someone to be watched and controlled. She wasn't a person, not really. She was a symbol, a reminder of the war and everything that had been lost. "I have no choice in the matter," Kalari said, her voice cold. "I am a prisoner, nothing more." Elias looked at her, his eyes searching hers for some sign that she didn't believe her own words. "That's not true, Kalari. You're not a prisoner here. You're not just some political pawn. You're a person." Kalari stood up, suddenly angry. "You don't understand. You can't understand. The Zyrek don't care about your feelings. They never did. They care about power. And if I'm seen as weak, if I'm seen as betraying them in any way, I'll lose everything." Elias took a step forward, his voice calm but firm. "No one's asking you to betray your people, Kalari. But you don't have to lose yourself in the process. You don't have to become what they want you to be." Kalari shook her head. "You don't understand. You think I can just change. But my people, they will never accept me if I side with you. I'll never be one of you. I'll always be Zyrek. I'll always be a symbol of what you fought against." Elias didn't reply immediately. He looked at her with a sadness in his eyes, as though he understood the pain she was feeling. "I know it's not easy," he said quietly. "But you don't have to be defined by what others expect of you. You're more than your people's expectations. You're more than just a piece in their game." Kalari turned away from him, looking out the window at the stars. Her heart ached with the weight of her situation. She had always been a warrior, always been taught to fight for her people, to fight for her honor. But now, standing here with Elias, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to life than the endless battles and political games that had shaped her existence. For the first time, She wondered if there was another way, a way where she didn't have to choose between the humans and the Zyrek, where she didn't have to lose herself to gain peace. But even as she thought this, doubt crept in. How could she truly belong to this new world? How could she truly let go of everything she had been taught to believe? Elias remained silent, his presence a steady comfort behind her. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he spoke again. "If you want to go back to Zyrek, I'll make sure you're safe," he said softly. "But if you want to stay, if you want to fight for something different, then I'll be with you. We'll face it together." Kailari's heart skipped a beat. The choice was hers now. She could go back to the Zyrek, where she would be safe, but where she would never be free. Or she could stay here, with the humans, and face whatever challenges lay ahead. She had never been good at making choices, but for the first time, Kailari felt a spark of hope. Perhaps this was the chance she had been waiting for. A chance to forge her own path, no matter where it led. "I don't know yet," she said softly, turning to face him. "But thank you, Elias. I need time." Elias nodded, his expression kind and understanding. "Take all the time you need. You're not alone in this." As he walked away, Kailari stood there for a long time, looking out into the vastness of space. Her decision wasn't clear yet, but for the first time, she felt that maybe, just maybe, she could choose her own future. The Unity's Edge continued its journey through the stars. But for Kailari, the vastness of space had never felt so small. Every corner of the ship, every face she passed, seemed to remind her of the decision she had yet to make. She was trapped between two worlds, two futures, and she didn't know which way to turn. The tension aboard the ship grew as well. The crew, despite their kindness, were still wary. The news of her possible return to Zyrek was no secret. Whispers followed her wherever she went, and it was clear the humans were waiting for her to make her choice. No one expected her to stay. No one believed she could change. They saw her as a relic of the war, something that would never belong to their world. "Not losing you on my watch." They ran together through the corridors, the ship groaning with each impact from the incoming enemy fire. The Unity's Edge was a formidable ship, but against a fleet of raiders, it would be vulnerable. Kailari knew that better than anyone. She had once been a commander, trained in the art of war. She wasn't just a diplomat. She had led troops into battle before. When they reached the command center, chaos greeted them. Officers and crew members scrambled to manage the ship's defensive systems. The view screens displayed a half-dozen enemy ships closing in fast. "Ambassador," a senior officer called to her, "we need your help. We've been locked out of the communications array. The raiders are jamming our signals." Kailari stepped forward, her mind racing. She quickly accessed the system with a few swift commands, her fingers flying over the control panel. She had once known these systems well. Though the Unity's Edge was far from her own ship, its technology wasn't vastly different from what she was used to. "Got it," she muttered, her voice steady. She disabled the jammer and opened a secure line to the ship's captain. "Elias," she said, calling out to him. "We can turn the tide, but we need to move quickly." Elias moved beside her, his eyes scanning the room. "What do you need?" "Send a signal to the raiders. A decoy. Something that'll make them think we're retreating, that we're running out of fuel," Kailari said. "They'll chase the signal, and we can surprise them from behind. We'll disable their lead ship." Elias didn't hesitate. He gave orders to his crew, and within moments, a decoy signal was transmitted into the space outside. Kailari watched closely as the raiders took the bait, shifting their formation to pursue the fake signal. "Now," she called. "Move in, close to the lead ship. We need to disable their weapons systems before they realize what's happened." The Unity's Edge lurched as it maneuvered into position. The ship's guns fired in quick succession, hitting the lead raider's engines and weapons systems. It wasn't a killing blow, but it was enough to slow them down, to create a window of opportunity. The other raiders began to scatter, realizing they had been tricked. For a long moment, Kelari and Elias stood side by side, watching the chaotic battle unfold on the view screen. Their plan had worked, and the raiders were retreating. "We did it," Elias said, his voice filled with quiet relief. Kelari didn't respond immediately. Her heart was still racing, but it wasn't from fear. It was from something else, a feeling she hadn't had in a long time. She had been a leader before, but this was different. She wasn't leading soldiers, she wasn't commanding a fleet. She was standing side by side with humans, fighting together for a common cause. For the first time, she realized that the strength of a team wasn't just in how powerful its weapons were. It was in how its members worked together, trusted each other, and fought for each other. The sound of the alarm switching off brought her back to the moment. The threat was over, but something had shifted in Kelari. The ice around her heart was beginning to crack. "You were right," she said quietly to Elias, her voice softer now. "I'm not just a symbol. I'm a part of this." Elias smiled, his expression warm and genuine. "You always were, Kelari." Kelari stood there for a moment longer, looking out at the stars. The weight of her decision still loomed over her, but something had changed. She wasn't the same person who had first set foot on the Unity's edge. She was no longer just a representative of the Zirek Empire. She was someone who had a stake in the future, someone who had found a new purpose among the humans, and that was a bond stronger than anything she had known before. The days following the attack by the Zirek raiders felt like a blur. The Unity's edge had suffered some damage, but nothing that couldn't be repaired. The crew, grateful for the quick thinking and leadership of Kelari and Elias, were in high spirits. For Kelari, however, the victory didn't feel as satisfying as it should have. It wasn't just the battle. It was the growing realization that she had stepped into a world she couldn't easily leave behind. She was no longer just a diplomat from the Zirek. She wasn't simply a prisoner of war, either. She was part of something now, a group of people who had accepted her, who had trusted her. But with that acceptance came a heavy responsibility. Kelari was torn between the loyalty she felt toward the humans and the duty she still had to her own people, the Zirek. The Unity's edge was heading toward a new diplomatic meeting, one that could change the course of intergalactic relations forever. It was meant to be a peaceful negotiation between several different species, Zirek, Terran, and others, on a neutral planet. But Kelari knew that the tension between the Zirek and the humans was far from over. The Zirek High Council had made it clear that they still considered her a symbol of their defeat, and they would not take kindly to her involvement with the humans. Kelari had received a transmission from Zirek only the day before, and the message was clear. "Return to us, Ambassador. Your place is here. You are our representative, not theirs." The message sent a shiver down her spine. The Zirek had always expected loyalty, even when it meant sacrificing everything. But now, standing on the bridge of the Unity's edge, watching the stars go by, Kelari couldn't help but feel that loyalty was no longer enough. She had come to realize that her actions, her choices, would define her. She wasn't just a tool to be used in a political game anymore. She was someone who had the power to shape her own future, but even as she wrestled with these thoughts, the truth was unavoidable. If she stayed, the Zirek would see it as betrayal. They would hunt her down. And if she returned, she would lose everything she had come to care for aboard the Unity's edge. That's when Elias found her. He had been avoiding her for the last few days, giving her space to think, but now he was standing in front of her, looking at her with those eyes that always seemed to see right through her defenses. "Kelari," he said softly, "we need to talk." Kelari nodded, stepping away from the observation window and turning to face him. She had been expecting this conversation for some time now, but she hadn't been prepared for how it would feel. She had spent days wrestling with her loyalty to the Zyrek and the feelings she had developed for the humans around her. But Elias had always been different. He had been there for her when no one else had. He hadn't treated her as an enemy, and for that, she was grateful. "I know what's coming," Kalari said quietly, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "The Zyrek are calling for me to return. They want me to leave." Elias sighed, stepping closer. "I had a feeling. I've seen the messages come through. But Kalari, you don't have to go back to them. You don't have to be what they want you to be." She looked at him, her eyes searching his face for some sign that he truly understood what she was facing. "You don't understand. If I go back to Zyrek, I'll be just a symbol of their power. I'll lose everything that has changed in me. But if I stay with you, I'll be a traitor. My people will never accept me. They'll see me as someone who betrayed them." Elias placed a hand on her shoulder, his grip firm but gentle. "You're not betraying anyone, Kalari. Not unless you choose to. You've already shown us who you are. You've fought with us, you've helped us, and you've done things that most Zyrek would never have done. You don't have to choose between them and us. You can be yourself. You can choose your own future." Kalari's heart pounded in her chest. His words, so simple and clear, were what she needed to hear. But the fear still gripped her. Fear of what the Zyrek would do if she chose this new path. Fear of losing everything she had ever known. "I don't know how to be anything else," Kalari whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't know how to be something that doesn't belong to Zyrek." "You've already started," Elias said, his voice full of conviction. "You've started by being here. By fighting with us, by caring about something other than the orders you were given. That's who you are now, Kalari. You're not bound to the Zyrek anymore." The words seemed to hang in the air, echoing, in her mind. For a long time, she had been trapped by the expectations of others, trapped by the idea of what she was supposed to be. But now, standing here with Elias, she realized something. She was more than a tool for politics. She was a person. Kalari's gaze softened, and for the first time in days, a small but genuine smile tugged at her lips. "What if they come for me? What if they attack the ship because of me?" Elias smiled back, though it was a quiet, serious smile. "Then we fight, together. I'll be here, and so will the crew. You're not alone, Kalari. We won't let them take you." The weight on her shoulders lightened ever so slightly. She still didn't know what her future held, but for the first time, she felt like she had a choice. She had the power to decide her own path. "I won't run," Kalari said, her voice stronger now. "I won't hide from who I've become." Elias nodded, his eyes filled with pride. "I'm glad to hear that." Kalari turned her eyes back to the stars, the weight of her decision still heavy in her chest. But now, there was a sense of clarity. No matter what happened next, no matter what came from the Zyrek, she knew that she had found something she never expected. A future where she was free to be herself, and that was something she would fight for, no matter the cost. The decision had been made. Kalari no longer felt the weight of indecision pressing down on her. She had chosen her path, not the one her people had set out for her, but one that was truly her own. The Zyrek High Council could call for her return, threaten her with punishment, but Kalari had already made up her mind. She had chosen to stand with the humans. It wasn't just about fighting with them. It was about something deeper, something that ran to the core of what she had come to understand. The humans had shown her that strength wasn't just about power or control. It was about compassion, unity, and finding strength in each other. That was something she could not ignore anymore. For the next few weeks, life aboard the Unity's Edge was busy. The ship was preparing for a major diplomatic summit on the neutral planet of Valis IV. The meeting was crucial, bringing together representatives from several species, including the Zyrek. The goal was to finally solidify a lasting peace, to end the war once and for all. Kelari was nervous. This would be the moment that would either solidify her place among the humans or reveal her as a traitor to both sides. She was no longer just an ambassador from the Zyrek. She was part of something much larger now, something that involved her actions, her choices, and her willingness to work toward a better future for all species. She had spent countless hours with Elias, learning the ins and outs of human diplomacy. At first, the idea of peace felt impossible to her. She had spent so many years fighting, so many years believing that the only way to survive was through power and dominance. But Elias had shown her that peace didn't mean weakness. It meant strength in unity, in understanding one another. On the day of the summit, Kelari stood in front of the large meeting hall, the weight of the moment heavy on her shoulders. She had been given a seat at the table, a voice in the negotiations, something no one had ever expected of her. And yet, as she walked into the room, she knew she was more than just a symbol. She was a participant in the future. The hall was filled with representatives from many different species, each one looking at her with varying degrees of curiosity, suspicion, and hope. The Zyrek contingent was present, and Kelari felt their eyes on her as she entered. Her father's emissaries were there, cold, calculating, watching her as though she were a traitor. But Kelari didn't flinch. She held her head high, walking with purpose, her heart steady. As she took her seat beside Elias, she caught his gaze, and for a moment everything else faded away. This was the moment. This was what she had fought for. Not just a political win, but a chance to build something real, something lasting. She wasn't a tool in someone's game anymore. She was a voice, a leader, someone who could influence the future. The meeting began, and the discussions were intense. There were disagreements, heated arguments, and moments of tension. But for the first time in her life, Kelari didn't feel like an outsider. She was part of the conversation, part of the solution. Every word she spoke was a step toward understanding, toward a future where the horrors of war would be a thing of the past. The Zyrek representatives were relentless, pushing their own agenda, demanding more from the humans, more from the peace process. But Kelari spoke up when it mattered, her voice firm and clear. She reminded the Zyrek that this peace would be for everyone, not just for one species. She called for compromise, for cooperation, and for a future that didn't rely on the old ways of dominance and control. Her words were powerful, not because of her position or her authority, but because they came from a place of understanding. She had lived through the war. She had seen the destruction, the loss, and now she was fighting for something different, not victory through force, but victory through unity. As the summit progressed, Kelari watched as the representatives began to shift. The humans were listening to her. The Zyrek were listening to her. And for the first time, she felt like her voice truly mattered. She wasn't just a representative of the Zyrek anymore. She was a representative of peace, of change. When the summit came to a close, a historic agreement was reached. The terms were not easy, and there would still be challenges ahead, but a path to lasting peace had been laid. The negotiations had been difficult, but in the end, the room was filled with a sense of accomplishment, of hope. Kelari felt a deep sense of pride. She had helped bring about something real, something tangible. She had been a part of something that would shape the future, something that would make the galaxy a better place. As the meeting concluded and the representatives began to leave, Elias turned to her, a smile on his face. "You did it, Kelari." "We did it." Kelari smiled back, feeling a warmth in her chest. "We did. And it's just the beginning." She knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more challenges, more obstacles to overcome. But for the first time, she didn't feel alone. She had found her place, not as a symbol of defeat, but as a person with a purpose. As the Unity's edge left the planet of Valis IV, heading toward the next phase of the peace process, Kalari stood at the observation window once more, watching the stars. They were no longer just distant points of light in the vastness of space. They were a promise of a future that had been built, not with weapons or force, but with understanding, trust, and the strength of a united people. Kalari had found her new home, not in a place, but in a future she could help shape. And that, she realized, was something worth fighting for,